If you've got an AE-20 or an AE-30 and you'd like to make some incredible new sounds like this, or this, then this is the video for you. Hi and welcome to my channel. My name is Alistair Parnell. I've been teaching saxophone, piano and wind synthesizer now for more than 40 years. I also run the iSax.Academy website. That's where you can get the very best courses to learn exactly how to do things on your Roland Aerophone. In the iSax.Academy, we have a brilliant forum and a regular monthly webinar where we all share ideas and I give everybody a tutorial each month on something different. And a few weeks ago, I was asked a question by one of our members: does the Aerophone have an arpeggiator? Of course, I said no, sorry, it doesn't, but that got me thinking, is it possible? Well, the answer is yes, it is. Kind of, and it's absolutely great fun. I've been spending hours playing with arpeggiators in the last few weeks. Now, it's going to be a bit of a deep dive, so you'll need to kind of follow along. You'll definitely need an AE-30 or AE-20 for this. You'll definitely need your Aerophone Pro editor app because that's the only way you can do this. And you'll need to follow those chapter markers along the bottom probably, and sometimes you'll want to nip back a little bit and pause the video because there's a few little steps involved in this, but I'm going to try and get through as quickly as I can. Let's get started. Before we go any further, just let me explain something. We're going to use something called an LFO. This is a low frequency oscillator. What this does is it can change something over time. So it could actually change vibrato, for instance, or it could change our pitch. It could change volume. It can change the filter. It can change the pan position. And we've got control over how that LFO affects our sound. We can use this LFO to mimic the sound of an arpeggiator. I've got my Aerophone connected to the editor app, and I'm going to start off with this classic saw sound. You're better to start with one of the synth sounds on this. You can use other sounds like the supernatural sounds, but there's a little setting you have to be aware of that works slightly differently when we use one of those. So for now, let's start with an easy one. Here's the classic saw sound. Now, what we need to do to begin with is press and hold on this sound to get to the next level of the editor. Some of you might have already found this section before, but we're going to have to dig a little bit deeper. So we're going here and we're going to press edit next to the classic saw sound. Now the editor's going to read a fair bit of information at this point, so just let this little wheel spin round whilst it's reading from your Aerophone, and then we're ready to go on the next step. Now it's easier if we take one of these partials at a time. Remember, if you watch some of my earlier videos, each part can have up to 4 partials. Okay, smaller parts if you like. And to begin with, it's much easier if we just have one of these. You see on this sound there are 2 different partials, and we're just going to use one of them. And if you just click on this little triangle at the bottom of that second partial, you'll get rid of that and turn it off just for now. So here we are, we're left with just what is a virtual analog saw sound, okay? Now, we're going to have to dig one step deeper than this. So again, we're going to press and hold on that title. And now we've got a whole extra level of editor app. Now, there's a ton of stuff on each one of these levels, but for now, we're just going to dig straight into the main components of making this arpeggiator app. So at the moment, I've just got a straight saw sound. Okay, so that's the sound that we're dealing with. Now, what we need to do is get to the LFO. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to press on this green down arrow here, and you can see we've got several options. We want the LFO 1. Okay, and here we are in the LFO 1. Now the next step is we want to go to the waveform at the top here, And again, if I click on this, I've got several options. Now, just to try and explain briefly, this is the way that the LFO will oscillate. And there are various shapes here. It can do a square wave, a saw wave, a triangle, all sorts of things. But actually what we want is the step option at the bottom. What this does is it sends the LFO to a series of up to 16 different steps, and we can control what those steps make a difference to. Okay, so a couple of things whilst we're at the top here. We do want to turn on rate sync. Now, I use this option here because at this point we can set this setting here to the speed that we want our arpeggiator to work on. And for this first example, I'm going to suggest you select this onto the 1/8 or quaver speed. The speed of this tempo, if you like, is actually set somewhere else, and I'm going to show you that in a little while. So let's just carry on with the settings here. I'm going to scroll down a little bit, and the next one that we want to set is, let's make sure that this key trigger is on. That will mean that whenever we play a note, the step sequence starts right at the start of the sequence. Now, here's the one that I found was the most important setting to work out. We're going to change the pitch depth. And for some reason, unbeknown to me, what works, at least for me, is to set this on 89. If anybody knows why that should be 89, please leave a comment down below, because I really don't understand why. I just know I've made it work with the setting at 89. Now, for this part of the sound, we're going to leave these other sections as they are. But just as we're looking at this, you can see that you could actually make the LFO change the filter depth, or the amp, which is the volume, or the pan position. So you could actually play around with letting the LFO change those settings as well. But I'm just going to show you how we get the first part of that sequencer sound that I played at the beginning. So scrolling down a little bit further, for now, you see here are the 16 steps. Goes 1 through 16, okay? And for now, we're just going to make the first part of that sound that you heard at the beginning. And it's got two sections to that sound. One of the parts is an octave, dum 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 dum, and the second part is an arpeggio. Okay, so for now we're just going to start off by setting up the octave part, and that just actually uses 2 steps because we've just got 2 notes doing the repeated octave. So here we're going to set the step size to 2. Obviously, if we wanted there to be more steps here, we'd select a greater step size. Now, I've often found that the steps here are in a slightly random position to begin with. So we certainly want the first step to be at 0 because we just want the note to play the note that we've already fingered on the instrument. And we're only using 2 steps. So this one here isn't going to make any difference at this point. If you want to be tidy, you could clean that up and set that to 0 if you want to. At the moment, all the other steps are set to 0. Now, on the second step, we want to produce an octave, and I'm going to suggest you try to do an octave higher, okay? Now, here's the thing. We already set up above here this pitch depth to 89. Now, what that translates to on this type of sound, that every 2 units here will actually equal 1 semitone step. So if I put this onto 2 here, now what I'll get is the note and a semitone up. So that's just doing a semitone up. And now you see we have freedom over this to select whatever interval we want, remembering that we need to choose 2 steps in this setting here, 2 units of that stepping to produce 1 semitone. So there's a bit of maths involved here. Now I've set the setting there to 24, what we're going to get is an octave. Okay, that's the start of our sound. Now, whilst we're in this section, I'll just explain to you how we can set up another step if we'd like to. So obviously here we'd want to increase the number of steps. So let's go to, say, 4 steps now. I already have my octave set here. I'm going to put this one on the 3rd step. I'm going to set that at 14, which actually translates to being a 5th above the note that I played. And here, let's go for 8. Let's see what we get now with 4 steps on our ladder. And that produces a nice major arpeggio for us. If I wanted to produce a minor arpeggio, well, it's actually this 4th step here. And if I just move that down to number 6, now I get a minor arpeggio. And so on. And the sound is still breath responsive. Everything else works as usual. The next thing I'd like to show you then is how we can change the speed if we'd like to. Well, first of all, if we go back to the top, remember we had this note rate at the top here. Well, I'll move this as I'm playing. You can see how it's going to increase the speed of our arpeggio. So we've got complete freedom there over how fast our little sequence goes. Just before we leave this section of the app, I want to show you another good option that's worth looking at here. I'm going to click on my green arrow here. This time I'm going to go to pitch. Now here in the course tune, if I want to, I can change the octave that the note is going to play to. So if I bring this down, say, to 24, it's going to drop down by 2 octaves. Remember, if you're enjoying this video, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. I'd love you to leave a comment below to say what you've done with your arpeggiators, and if you've got any further ideas, please share them in the comments below. Okay, so that's the first step. Now, what we've got to be careful of here is to realise that what we've done so far, we are actually editing what we call a tone. Remember, a scene can have up to 4 different tones in it, and within each tone can have 4 partials. So we're now actually wanting to save this tone, and if you back out of this part of the editor app here, well, it will ask you at some point, are you sure you want to go any further, because you haven't saved that tone. So what we need to do is press right here, and then be careful, don't overwrite one of your tones that's already in there. So scroll down to a free slot where it will say init tone, and then you can go ahead and name your tone. So here we might want to, for instance, rename that major arpeggio and save it to where it is. So far so good. So we've saved our first arpeggio pattern or our octave pattern, whichever way you want to do. I'm back on the main page of my editor now, and I'd like to show you where we set that tempo. It's back on this main page. We press common, and you can see at the top here the scene tempo. So if I play my arpeggio and adjust this tempo, I'm now changing the overall tempo. Here I am then back at my first partial here, and I've got my octave set up to work. and I've dropped it 2 octaves so that I've got some space here. Now I want to add a second pattern here. If you remember in that first demo I did, there is a more elaborate pattern going over the top. Now that's actually something that I've done on the second partial. So for now, I'm going to turn this first partial off, and let's have a look what I've got here on the second partial. I'll turn this on. So again, I've set the step in the waveform. I've set step there. This time I've set the note rate to 16 because I want this to move a little bit faster. As I scroll down, key trigger switch is switched on, and the pitch depth is set to 89. That's great. This time I've set the step size to 8. Now the settings here, which I'm going to leave on the screen for a moment, are slightly different. That's because the oscillator that this sound uses requires me to set each semitone will be equal to 4 units in this setting here. So this is what I've actually used to create that pattern. It sounds like this. And whenever I start the note, the pattern is going to start from the beginning. So those are my settings there to give us the major arpeggio. So now we can have both partials running at the same time. One of them's doing the octave and the other one is doing the arpeggio. So here I'm going to go to partial 1 and turn my octaves back on. Let's have a listen. So far, so good, but some of you are probably still thinking, yes, but what about the other chords? Well, I've saved this now, remember, as a major arpeggio. So what I can do now, if I go back to my main page, I've got my first tone loaded. Remember, that's the one with the octaves repeating and the arpeggios going, my major arpeggio. Now, if I just click on this second tone, what I can do now is go to tone group and select user. And this is the list here that you'll find that user sound that you saved earlier. And you'll see here, I've already prepared this one. This is the minor arpeggio. And if I go into the same settings here, it's going to read this next sound. And again, I'm going to press on this second one. The first part has remained the same because the octave remains the same. But here in the steps for the arpeggio, I'll leave those on screen for a moment there. I've done this slightly differently because now this produces my minor arpeggio. But I'm still hearing you ask some questions. How come you've got both of those parts on, but only one of them is sounding at the same time? Well, what I've done is I've taken the range of 3 octaves on the Aerophone. I've made the bottom octave only play this sound, which is the minor arpeggio. The next octave I've set to the tone which gives us the major arpeggio. And actually a third octave I've set to be a different chord, a suspended 4th chord, by changing the notes here in the step sequencer. I'll show you how I do it. So here I am back in the main page of the editor. And remember, I've actually produced these different chords simply by loading in my major arpeggio, going and tweaking just the steps for the arpeggio part, save it as a new tone. I've called it minor arpeggio in this case, and then I've got my minor arpeggio. I've done the same for the sustained 4th arpeggio. If I click and hold on the major arpeggio, I can show you here, when you get this drop down arrow, it might start at mode here, but you want range. And this is where you can see I've set the range for this part from C4 to B4. And if I go back and edit the minor part of this sound. I've actually got the range here from right from the bottom of the instrument, C-1 only up to B3. Going back again, and I'll show you here the sustained arpeggio. Well, that's C5 to G9. The other thing I've set is the octave for each one of those, so they all sound like they're in the same octave, even though I'm switching octaves here. Because I've moved the octaves in the settings, then they all come out at the same octave. So if I play with my thumb pressing the lowest octave here, I get minor arpeggio. If I let go of the octave key, I'm in the middle octave now, I get major arpeggio. And if I press the upper octave, this is where I get my sustained fourth arpeggio. And that's how I made my sound. It's absolutely great fun. I just wanted to show you a couple of other examples that I have done. It's also possible to make your arpeggiator into one of the drones. So here I've got a different pattern that I've made, and I'm pressing on this and editing here. I'm going to mode, and I've set this as drone. Now remember, you will then need to go into your internal settings here. I've got my thumb button, my thumb pad. This is set to drone switch. You could equally use the thumb wheel here to be a drone switch if you wanted to as well. So now what I can do is I can set the drone going, and I've got a second sound here, the taking lead sound. That's a sound that I can use to play over the top. So here's my drone. And that's just going to keep playing for me automatically. Now the instrument is going to produce my taking the lead sound. Now, remember from early on we said that actually there are two LFOs. Well, that means that in the second LFO, if we'd like to, we can create some more controls over our arpeggio. So here I'm going to show you briefly what I did with what I called the funky arp here. I'm going into Edit, and as we've seen already, I've set up my arpeggio. I'm going to press and hold on this one here, and I'm going to show you my LFO1, and here's my arpeggio settings. Now this one is a 16-step arpeggio, okay? Now I've also had a look at the second LFO here. So to get to that, we just click on our green arrow again and go to LFO2. Now, I've also set this LFO to step, but further down, I've set the filter depth to -79 in this case. Now, what this is going to do on certain steps is actually going to change the filter depth. So when you hear this sound, you'll hear that some of the notes have been either muted or almost cut off completely. Let's have a listen to this one. So that's a really interesting rhythmic figure that I've got by having now 16 steps and having some of those steps be muted by changing the filter. You could also change the pan position or change the volume of those notes. And you can either use the step position, or the other thing that works very well is up here to set this to something like the sine wave at the top. And then say something like a pan will just gradually move from side to side, which is also a nice effect. Now again, I've set this one up to have a lead sound as well. So my funky arp, that is a drone again. And then the lead sound, I've actually made this have a harmony sound to it as well. So I've got that rhythmic pattern going in the arpeggiator. And in my second part, I've set up a lead sound which actually plays in thirds. Now, this does use the intelligent harmony, but on your AE-20, you could use a different harmony or a different interval to get a similar effect. So now if I set off my arpeggiator, that's going to keep going for me. And on the top, I've got this second sound in thirds. I can build up a really nice texture. Again, I've got complete control over the dynamic range, and the sound works just like a regular sound would do. For breath response, I did a little video to show you how that could be taken further using a looper pedal. I've been having so much fun with these arpeggiators, and I was really keen to share the information with you because it's such a unique idea. I don't think I've ever seen anybody do this with an Aerophone before. If you manage to produce some of your own arpeggiators and make a video on your own channel, please share them. I will make a follow-up video where we highlight some of those best examples so the other subscribers can see what you've done with this great idea too. And don't forget, please leave me a thumbs up. Visit the iSax.Academy if you'd like more great courses and tutorials just like this one. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.